Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. It is 6:15 p.m., May 6th, the United States Central Time, and I'm here, Thanasi Delis, with Smokey the Bear. How you doing, Smokey?
I'm doing great.
You know, I know you live in the woods, so I always try to keep you updated with what's going on in the world, and
Ah,
crazy, terrible things are happening right now.
do
Uh,
tell.
People are dying,
Oh,
or people are being born, which
oh,
some people would say is a terrible thing, but we don't care about any of that, do we?
not at all.
And why is that? Why don't we care?
We got philosophy.
Of course, and that's what this show is all about. We've been reading Aristotle so far. We're a little ways in. How you liking it so far?
It's all right. It's not Plato. It's not Socrates. We prefer, the Bears. We do prefer the Socrates, but it's not bad.
Okay. Well, I'm getting a little bit more, I guess you could say acclimatized. I'm getting a bit more of an affinity for soccer or for Aristotle, but who knows? By the time I finish it, I might hate him. What part are we on right now?
Well, we are still in the antepredicamenta. We're still in sort of the opening part of categories.
Gotcha.
This is part three, forms of the predicate, and really what he's starting to do, and this is something I share with students that I work with, and why I think everybody in graduate school should read Aristotle's categories. It's one of the first dissertations ever written, in my opinion. Um, he he starts off by giving us some definitions, and then he starts going into his methods, and he starts talking about what you can do and what you can't do, and
Right.
what you can measure and what you can't measure, and all this good stuff. And so in part three, he starts talking about uh, characteristics that can be used to make inferences.
Okay.
And so, if you're ready,
Yeah, definitely.
uh,
But actually, just real quick before we even begin, because he's talking about the forms of the predicate,
yes,
the idea here, from a categorical perspective, is that he's got the presence in a subject, and then he's got what's predicable,
yep,
and now he's breaking down further. He's further deconstructing, is what the term I would use here. Is
yep,
that right? Okay, cool. All right.
yep. So he says, when one thing is predicated of another, all that which is predicable of the predicate will be predicable also of the subject. And if you've ever spent any time with lawyers, the party of the first part, the party of the second part, so on and so
Right.
forth. Thus, man is predicated of the individual man, but animal is predicated of man. It will therefore be predicable of the individual man also, for the individual man is both man and animal. If genre are different and coordinate, their differentiae are themselves different in kind. Take as an instance the genus animal and the genus knowledge. With feet, two-footed, winged, aquatic are differentiae of animal. The species of knowledge are not distinguished by the same differentiae. One species of knowledge does not differ from another in being two-footed. So he's saying, if I got two genera, if I got two things, and they are measurable, coordinate, they are measurable, then how I measure the one thing is not the same way that I measure the other thing.
Right.
But where one genus is subordinate to another, there is nothing to prevent their having the same differentiae. For the greater class is predicated of the lesser, so that all the differentiae of the predicate will differentiate also of the subject.
Okay. This is much easier to follow than the first two parts. And I think in large part because the it would seem that the connection from what this is saying right here to what we use today is like almost identical. So, like, just to start off with a couple of examples to make sure that I'm fully understanding, we measure. distance and temperature completely differently, right?
Yes.
So, hot and cold is measured in degrees, either, Celsius or Fahrenheit, but we don't say that, that I'm, 10 degrees away from somebody else. We would say that I'm 10 feet away from somebody else, right?
Yeah, yeah, I that's not a really good example because you can actually measure distance in degrees, but it's a different kind of degrees. You're thinking temperature degrees, but there are degrees of angles as well.
Of course, but I don't think that we're, even then, I don't think we measure one's distance
That is
by the
true, but it
angle
can
that they're
all,
from each
all I'm
other.
suggesting is when you create an example, you got to be careful of the language that you use. And this actually goes back to part one, the difference between equa and equi.
Sure, yeah. I mean, I don't, I understand that degrees is an equivocal naming between with two different definitions of like the degrees in geometry versus the degrees in
Yep.
temperature. I totally get what you're saying.
I'm being a pedantic bear.
You're being extremely pedantic right now. Um, Even so, uh, what we can say is that in distance, it, a foot is measured by inches, and a mile is also measured by feet. So
Whoa.
by extension, a mile can also be measured by inches.
There you go. That is, yeah, that's great.
That's what I was trying to lead to before you completely derailed me.
Ah, sorry.
You son of a bitch. I'm just kidding.
No,
Um,
that's son of a bear.
okay, that's fair. You got a bitch of a bear, honestly. Uh, and that seems to be like the totality of what he's sharing in this is just,
Yes.
he's deconstructed what's predicable, which it seems like the noun version of what's predicable is a predicate. Is
Yep.
that right? Am I following
Yep.
that so far?
Yep.
Okay.
But now here's the thing. He's introduced the concept of hierarchy.
Right. No, I mean, I would say that the hierarchy has been there the whole time, but I guess it's the first time he's explicitly introducing the concept,
Yep.
right?
And he's introducing really, and this is a concept that predates this, but he's talking about first principles. He's talking about things that nobody would question,
Okay.
that are, first principles are definitions, which is part one. First principles can be primitive notions, things that we just don't question. So he is really introducing, he's describing, he's transitioning from those first principles into a methodology, but he's still carrying some of those ideas forward. We don't question that if A equals B and B equals C, A equals C. I mean, we learned that in math class in elementary school now. We don't question it.
Right.
But
So this paper itself is presupposing that we all intuitively understand that already.
yeah, it's just one of the, yeah, he's just writing it down. He's saying, hey, here's, here are things to consider as being true.
Okay.
Whether you want to call them self-evident, whether you want to call them primitive, whether you want to call them a definition or first principles, he's simply saying these points are exist and they're going to be useful for us to keep in mind as we read more sections
Okay.
or more
Right. Of course.
parts.
Yeah, for sure. That makes sense. Yeah. And then just lessons, but where one genius is subordinate to another, there's nothing to prevent their having the same differentiae. For the greater class is predicated of the lesser, so that all the differentiae of the predicate will be the differentiae also of the subject. Are there any like existing counterexamples of this where um a genus is subordinate to another, but the differentiae don't apply accordingly?
Well, and that goes back to, are we talking induction versus deduction, and are we talking inference versus deference?
Okay.
Uh, it gets tricky because you're on the edges when you start asking that question, and we're not ready to really address that question. I will simply say this: depending on who you ask that question, the answer is a definitive yes or a definitive no.
Gotcha. Okay.
But for most people, the answer is who cares?
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay.
It
Yeah. Do
it
we have any slides today?
oh, we definitely do. You know how bears are with their slides. We love our slides. Uh Let me share my slides. Tell me that you can see. Can you see my slides?
No,
You
I'm
can't.
kidding. I'm messing with you. I can't.
Don't mess with this bear. You don't. You don't want to mess with a bear in the woods.
Yeah, you say that, and you mean to sound one way, but it sounds a very different way, sir.
So we're talking about forms of the predicated.
Yeah.
And so he starts off by saying you can have two predicates. Yes?
Mm-hmm.
You've got and but is it one or is it two? Well, it depends on the subject. Animal can be a predicate can predicate man, but the individual man, but so can man.
Right.
But and this is kind of the idea of all squares are rectangles, but rectangles aren't squares. It's not the
Right.
exact analogy, but it's getting to that idea.
Mm-hmm.
Directionality in terms of how we think.
Okay.
Uh, do we think in terms of animal goes to individual man, or do we think that man fits into the category of animal?
No, I
And
get what you're saying. So, real quick, just to make sure. So, it can be sequential, the animal to man, and then man to an individual man. But then you could also, it can be insequential, unsequential. Not, it can be not sequential, and
there you
that
go.
animal can go directly to the individual man, and separately, man can go to the individual man.
And amazingly enough, we still use this idea in modern statistics.
Okay.
It's a mediation moderation models, and we still do it in research, and it's also path analysis. We use this idea that's over 2,500 or roughly 2,500 years old, and he outlines it, and all we've done is applied probabilities and proportions and mathematics to this idea that he has right here. It's amazing.
That's very interesting.
Yep. So all he's saying is if I have two, I can I can use both or I can use each one individually. Now, and at the risk of derailing our conversation, can you see why him starting with equivocal and univocal definition, defining these terms becomes important?
Very much so. Yeah. Because whether it's equivocally named or univocally named is going to dictate if you treat it derivatively or not.
Not derivatively.
Wouldn't this, oh, sorry. No, I conflated these. But it would dictate whether something is predicable of something else.
Yes.
Yeah.
Makes sense?
Very much, yeah.
This is why I like talking to smart people. He goes on to say, however, in the second part or the second element of part three, he says, well, but wait a second. What if I have two different genre, but they're coordinate? In other words, I can measure them.
Hmm.
Then the manner in which I measure them cannot be equal.
Right.
And remember what I said last time. Don't get bogged down in the examples. The examples is where everybody goes, but really what you want to focus on are his statements. He's saying, I got two genre. If they are different, then how I measure those two genre have to be different.
Sure.
It makes sense.
Yeah.
And then he finishes with the idea, but wait a second. Remember at the very beginning, I said you can have something that is subordinate. I introduced this idea of this can lead to this, and this, the first this can lead to the second list, and then the second this can lead to the final product. He's saying, wait a second, if I have a genre, and I went outside what he wrote, I said, you could have a genre called birds. Yes.
Right.
And then you could have another genre called penguin. And you can put penguin under birds. And if you do that, and if you assume that it is under it, subordinate, then however you describe or measure birds can also be applied to how you measure or characterize penguins.
Right.
Now, you'll notice I played a little trick on you. It's
Hmm.
with feet,
Sure.
two-footed, and winged. Now the question is, do penguins have wings?
I don't know the answer to that actually.
Well,
I I don't know if
depending,
they're wings.
well,
Go ahead.
so then the question becomes: is it an issue with our definition? In other words, or of our measurement, or is it a question of how we interpret what we measure?
Right. And the answer to that is going to depend upon how the people involved are going to value what's best, right? From
Yes.
there, you have to start like deciding, like making a decision on like how you measure what the best move is. Because if you decide, okay, well then we need to go with what's easiest, then you're probably going to land on how we define a thing, maybe, right?
Yes. But
But then if you were to decide, okay, well, what's the most like accurate to a degree that makes it difficult for us to run into the same problem in the future, then you could potentially, try to change everybody's interpretation of the same definition, which
yep,
would probably be way more difficult to do initially. So it just depends, right?
it depends. However, let's tackle this problem. Does
Okay,
a let's play with this. We got a couple of minutes.
sure.
Does a penguin have wings? Well, we can address the question either through function or form.
Okay.
Which would you prefer? We'll do both, but which do you want to do first?
Can you explain to me what form means in this?
Form would be like the way it's designed, the way that it looks, what it's made of.
Gotcha. Okay.
Function would be how it's used, what it's used for.
Gotcha. Okay, right. Um, well, yeah, we can start with function.
Function. What is the function of a wing?
Function of a wing is to fly.
Is to fly. Okay. Can penguins fly?
No.
Are you sure?
Yes.
Why are you sure?
Why am I sure that penguins can't fly?
Yes.
Um, I'm sure that penguins can't fly because I've been told multiple times that penguins can't fly, and I've
What
never
is it?
seen anything
All
to
right.
touch.
Then the question becomes, what does it mean to fly?
Uh, what I don't actually know the definition. I think what flying means is to be able to travel through the air, to propel yourself through the air for an extended period of time
All
without
right.
having to like like the difference between flying and jumping is that the whole period that you're jumping is that you've lifted yourself off the ground and then you're proceeding to either hit a peak or plateau or fall back to the ground.
All right.
But flying, you can continuously lift yourself off the ground without having to make contact again.
So you are an explorer
Okay.
hundreds of years ago, and you
Sure.
come across this thing,
Yeah.
and you've never seen it before, and you try to figure out where it belongs, and you say to yourself, birds can fly. And you
Hmm.
say that fly means going through the air. Yes?
Yeah.
What if I change the definition for flying represents going through the air and say flying is something a body does in a fluid? Because is air not a fluid?
It's not, but
It
we can,
is.
we can argue that too. Air is a gas.
It's
Air
a
is not.
gas. It is a gas, but well, and we got to get a little more modern. I promised we weren't going to go modern. But can you understand how I could change the definition of fly to change the medium from air to a medium?
Sure, I understand where you're leading with this.
Yeah, I'm trying to go down the historical pathway. I apologize.
No, it's okay. I mean, yeah, it's just that's a whole lot of history that we'd be going down.
It is.
Um,
But what if I change the definition of to fly means I have to go through the air, to fly means I have to go through a liquid, to fly I have to go through a medium.
right, yeah. If you want to say that like wings are like the function of wings is to propel yourself through a non um
Just
uh
no, no, none, just through a medium.
propel yourself through a medium. Okay, yeah, sure,
So we can say that air is a medium, but we could also say water is a medium.
sure.
Okay. Now all of a sudden, does and does not a wing give you the ability to change your direction and reach plateaus and things of that nature?
Yeah,
Dive and come up.
yeah.
And can penguins use their appendage that we have yet to name a wing? But when they're in the water, They're
The
in a
function would
medium
be the same. Yes.
and it has the same function.
Yeah.
Okay. Form. What is the form of a wing?
Um,
And I don't know is a
just-
perfectly acceptable response.
yeah, I mean, I just don't know all the factors that would fit into that.
Can,
Like,
can,
I go ahead.
no, can we say that a wing is an appendage?
Yeah,
Can we say that a wing is analogous to is analogous to say the arms of higher order animals?
sure. If you were to begin with saying it's an arm-like appendage, yeah, that would
And
fit.
we start building this definition for what a wing is. Can we say that a wing has certain curves on it that expedite the ability to move through a medium?
So an aerodynamic arm-like appendage is what we have so far.
Does
Yes.
this make sense?
Yeah.
That's the form. So as we evolve our definitions, as we evolve, all of a sudden, penguin is no longer this freaky looking tuxedo wearing son of a gun waddling down the street.
Hmm.
It's now become a bird.
Right.
And this is very important how we do this. And it's taxing and it takes years. And it's very difficult because we have to question what we believe something is.
Right.
On the surface, it's really simple. Hey, bird, penguin goes under bird. Why are we questioning this?
I understand. I think, I know you hate getting bogged down in the examples, but we're working
Yes,
with an example right now. Moving over to an inanimate example, maybe it would be a little bit easier for me to make sure that I'm fully collecting everything that I think I understand.
certainly.
So, the very common trope would be a chair and a table. And then I
Yes,
think if we were to start digging into form and function there, then you'd start being able to, identify pretty easily the same things that you're talking about here, right? Where
yes,
so a chair and a table obviously have differences, but if you're discussing the differences in form, you're going to start running into some problems, making it very clear when you're talking about a chair versus a table. But if you start discussing differences in function, all of a sudden they're quite a bit more clear, right?
yes. Yeah,
Okay,
I can sit on a table. I can sit on a chair. But
sure.
what if I change it to a, where do I put my food? Where do I put my papers when I'm studying? All of a sudden, table pops up in a person's mind more than chair.
Right.
And this is all he's saying. He's saying you have to have a common set of definitions. Here's how you make the definitions. Part one. You have to have an understanding of this idea of what is predicable and what is not predicable and what is present and what is not present. Part
Right.
two. You have to understand that things that are predicable are create hierarchies and how those hierarchies can interact with each other. They can be connected, they cannot be connected. Or to go back to part two, they can be present or they cannot be present.
Okay, yeah.
And so he's
Um,
got to get these ideas out first before he can identify his categories.
sure. Yeah. Because um he's got to get these ideas out first before he can identify his categories. Once he lays out his categories, you need to understand how he's going to use each of those categories in language,
Yep.
how he's naming those categories, and then from the sentence structure or the content of whatever claim he's making with each category, you need to know how he's naming that category in that particular case. So in this particular time in the future when we continue reading, he'll take a category and he'll be saying something and he'll be naming that category univocally. But then another time he may be naming that category equivocally, and it'll be we'll need to be able to tell reverse engineering based on what he's saying.
And in every
Right.
dissertation and in every scientific paper, there are two elements at the end of these papers that talk about the theoretical value and the practical application value.
Right.
And that's what he's setting you up for. He's saying, hey, here are my definition. Here are some definitions. Here are some general ideas, first principles. I'm about to give you my answers. And once I do, I've got to explain them both in terms of theory and practice. Because
Okay.
I can come up with, and he comes up with 10 categories, but if those 10 categories are not, and he's laying out, I can talk about them theoretically, and there's nothing wrong with that. And that's a good thing because you know how we feel about philosophy. But there has to be a practical value to these categories as well.
Sure.
If they're not usable by others, then he's going to be sitting there saying, everybody's going to say, what's the point? And this is sort of where, and if I believe we've talked about Diogenes,
Hmm.
Diogenes and the featherless
Yeah. Yeah.
chicken. Yeah. So Plato is sitting there saying a man is a featherless a biped. And then Diogenes, the cynic, comes in with the chicken that he's plucked all the feathers off and says, behold, here is your man. Okay.
Right. Yeah. I remember
So,
that.
so Plato is just coming up with an idea of what a category is. And Diogenes is able to very quickly show him that it's not a true category.
Right. And this is what leads to this paper being considered the first dissertation is
Not,
because
I never said that. I said it is one of what I would consider one of.
okay, we could probably go back. Thank God this was recorded. I am 99.9% sure you said it's the first dissertation,
To,
but that's okay. I see where like okay, because he's making claims from the very beginning, the whole subject matter is about how people use language. He's and then he's hypothesizing
yes,
how people use language. He has to answer for both things. He has to have a conclusion theoretically, and he also has to have a conclusion materially
yes.
because of the nature of the subject matter that he's talking about.
And that's modern day academia.
Right. Yeah, that's the exact same through line that we follow to this day.
To this day. Now, I will stop talking now before I go off on a tangent.
No, yeah. Can we hop back to the text if you don't mind?
No, that was it. That was it. Next time, we finally get to see what his categories are.
For sure. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, no, I was just hoping to just review the text real
Oh,
quick
the
based
text. One
on
more
what we were
time. I
talking about.
misunderstood. See,
No,
language.
you're okay.
Um, da, da, da. One of these days, I'm going to learn how to push buttons.
Awesome. Okay. When one thing is predicated of another, all that which is predicable of the predicate will be predicable also of the subject.
The
Thus,
individual.
man of the what?
Of the individual. The subject, he's saying, of the individual.
Right, right, yeah. Thus, man is predicated of the individual man, but animal is predicated of man. It will therefore be predicable of the individual man also, for the individual man is both man and edible and animal. So in this case here, it's actually the multiple paths that we can take to lead from animal to the individual man. That's implied here.
Yep.
It goes to follow, right? But but it's not explicitly stated. And then if genre are different in coordinate, their differentiae are themselves different in kind. Take as an instance the genus of animal and the genus of knowledge. And then with feet, two-footed, winged, aquatic, and our differentiae of animal, the species of knowledge are not distinguished by the same differentiae. One species of knowledge does not differ from another in being two-footed. Okay, yep, I'm following that as well. And then we already went over the last sentence. Yeah, okay. This is a really good episode. Well, Smokey, thank you so much for putting all this together for
Hey,
everybody. Guys, thank you so much for watching. Please like and subscribe. We're going to get all the way through categories here, and we'll be posting again next Thursday. And yeah, everybody have a great rest of your week.
bye. You're gonna have to edit again.
Yeah, for sure. You gotta finish recording first.